Hello and welcome to the Montessori Moments podcast. My name is Elias Rodriguez and I'll be your host. Today I'm interviewing Gary Johnson. He's kind of the other half of the Monarch Pathways organization that focuses on leadership development and ensuring that the frontline staff have a positive culture that they enjoy coming to work for. So I hope you'll enjoy. Without further ado, here is Gary Johnson. All right, everyone. Hello, welcome. Today I am interviewing Gary. Hi, Gary.
Hey, Erod.
Yes, I really like that name. I wish I would have been an athlete and had that cool acronym, but unfortunately not. So we've been having a few internet issues this morning, but it's such a beautiful day where I'm at. How's the day looking like where you're at?
It's awesome. That's great.
We can just brush these problems right off, right?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So I think the purpose of today really was to get a little bit of an insight on who you are from a personal level and also maybe what makes you tick, what motivates you. So I'm going to be lobbing you some questions, some of them easy, some of them really hard. They're going to make you really rack your brain a bit, but I'll start off with an easy one. Where were you born and where'd you grow up?
I was born in a city a little bit north of New York City in Kingston, New York. But I grew up near Washington, D.C., so right near the nation's capital in Bethesda, which would be, maybe a half a mile from Washington, D.C.
Okay. And I don't really notice an accent from New York, is there a DC accent that I may not be aware of?
I don't know. DC doesn't have an accent, mostly because people come and go there. Maryland does. So
Yeah.
I have a Maryland mumble,
Okay.
which is characteristic of people in Maryland. So we tend to mumble our words. Yeah.
Give me an example. I don't hear any mumbling at all.
Well, I'll ask you at the end. But
Okay.
like I'll say Washington. Like we put R's in a lot of things instead of Washington. Like how do you say Washington?
Funny. Washington.
Yeah, I say Washington. Yeah.
That's pretty funny. Okay, so that's part of the mumble.
Yeah.
Very good. And Gary, do you have any hobbies or anything that you really enjoy doing on your off time?
Yeah, when I was a kid, my brother and I used to have a small sailboat. We probably had sailboats since we were in elementary school. And right now I share a boat with my brother-in-law, 41-foot CNC. So we're right on the Chesapeake Bay. So.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So it's a lot of fun, actually.
That is amazing. 41 feet seems enormous. And ironically, I just met a gentleman who told me that his whole life he dedicated to the Chesapeake Bay and worrying about the under on the floor flora, or basically all the bacteria and things that were going on in the Chesapeake Bay. Incredibly fascinating. I didn't know it was bordered by two states that really focus on the Chesapeake Bay, and that's where your slip is. It's so interesting that I'm learning so much about that place.
Yeah. It's pretty neat. You'll have to come see it.
Are you kidding me? I'd love to check out the sailboat. So how far have you sailed? What's the longest trip you've ever taken on a sailboat?
Well, I used to do boat deliveries. So we would typically go from here down to maybe Miami and sail boats back from Miami up either the intercoastal or out through the water. I sailed from Miami over to Bimini, the Bahamas.
No kidding. Oh my
goodness.
Yeah,
my brother-in-law is a transatlantic sailor. So he's been over like to Africa and sailed back. He has
no kidding.
Yeah. So I think I've mostly sailed around the East Coast.
That is fascinating. I had no idea. All the way to Africa and back on a sailboat. It seems so dangerous and like kind of like exploring. That's really cool.
Yeah, it is neat.
So boat deliveries, that does not surprise me. I feel like every time I talk to you, you've had another job in your past. You must have had 40 jobs from what I can tell. What's some interesting jobs that you've held that maybe have given you some experience that's unique?
Well, one job that I really enjoyed is for a number of years, I was a butler for a family. Actually, they lived on the water too.
Wow.
and uh, they were part of a family that had. Have you ever been to Newport, Rhode Island?
No, I actually have not been to the East Coast much at all.
Oh, well, this family had a bunch of different mansions and whatnot, but they made all their money when Americans got rid of their outhouses years ago, and plumbing started moving inside. And there's a process where I think, I guess it would be steel and porcelain were melded together to make toilets. Like, so that's kind of how toilets work.
Wow.
So they, I think, figured out how to make that process, and then they sort of, as people moved west, kind of where you are, they also got rid of their outhouses like that across the country, and so they rode the wave of indoor plumbing.
Wow. Oh my goodness. That's pretty cool to make all of your money on an essential that we all kind of take for granted now.
And you should check in your house. You might have a Crane toilet.
Crane is the name? Crane?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. And you were a butler there. How old were you at the time?
In my early 20s. Yeah.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So that was neat. They had, so I had my choice of cars. So they had Ferraris, Rolls Royce, all kinds of Mercedes, Lincoln Town cars. Yeah, pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, that sounds pretty awesome. Oh my goodness. That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So we had heard a little bit from Joe that you had worked at a senior living facility, maybe
Yeah.
as a COO. Had you been in that kind of industry for a while, or what led you to that realm of work?
Yeah, so I've worked in hospital emergency rooms. I worked in psychiatry for maybe 13 years. And then I switched over to senior living. I was there about 13 years too, 13, 14 years. Yeah.
So with all that, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, like, I just sort of happened into it. I didn't really think much about, I wasn't purposeful in going there. But I've ended up really liking it.
Yeah. And so with all this experience in different jobs and length, how do you think people would describe you with all those mesh of experiences?
Well, when I was really little, like probably up to age 1, I didn't talk much. I was an observer. My mom would describe me as someone who would just watch. And I think I'm still a pretty intense observer of things. I'm like really mindful of small things. So I think people might describe me as someone, well, they do describe me as someone they feel safe with. They tend to disclose things to. I hope they describe me as someone that has them be a better person for interacting. There's not a lot more to life than loving people. So I hope that would be loving as well.
Those are all incredible qualities, Gary. Wow, that's awesome. I would very much agree with all the things you said. I've had the pleasure of speaking and getting to know you more and more, and I would say that those are spot on. That's probably exactly what I would use. Definitely make you feel safe and comfortable and easily open up. And yeah, it's really good. You're my coach, so I definitely feel that that very much.
Hey, Elias,
So
you got like the perfect place to interview someone because you got like the birds going in the background. You got the rocking chair.
it's kind of serene over here.
You got the AirPods. Yeah, you're like happening.
Yeah, this is good. I'm really enjoying it so far. And so, Gary, I'd love to ask you, what is your job title at Monarch Pathways?
Yeah, so I think right now it's partner and consultant.
Partner and consultant.
Yeah.
We were able to get a little bit of insight from Joe's interview on how you kind of came about with getting in contact with Monarch Pathways. But what made you go and stay there once you kind of did that one retreat?
Yeah, so what made me leave is I turned 55. And I
Okay.
thought, like, yeah, you know what? I could probably stay where I am, but if I'm going to make a change, I should change, because then I'd have another 15 years, 20 years to put into something. So I thought about like what what I wished I would have been able to accomplish that I hadn't been able to. And one of the things I didn't feel good about was the place where I worked ran very well, got all kinds of awards, really pretty nice place. I didn't feel good about the level of warmth or love that the frontline workers felt for whoever it was that they thought as their supervisor. I felt like I could have done a better job at that, like trying to figure out how to make that flourish. So an opportunity came up and I thought like, yeah, I might as well just quit.
Wow, that is a huge leap. And what did you have some sort of empowerment knowing that you'd have direct ability to shape that? Maybe
Yeah,
leadership development, or what made you, think that this was the right time to leap?
I was bored.
Okay.
Yeah, so I thought, and you also think like you only have so much time in life, right? And so I had spent enough time doing what I was doing. I wasn't really learning anything. Um, so I thought like, yeah, uh, I mean, it was, in some ways, it was a bigger risk to stay than to move. Uh, it's a smaller risk to try something than it is to just sort of stay where you are. Um, for me, at that point, I had had a lot of leeway in that job and made the most of it. So I was ready to try something new. Plus, I was sort of tired of, this engagement of employees across the country is just heartbreaking. Like, it's just sad. Um, And I thought like, yeah, I don't know that it needs to stay that way. So why not try something different?
So tell me a little bit more about that, the engaged employees across the country.
Well, I ran across years ago across these research studies that said, maybe at best 30% of people are engaged in a company. So and then I ran across something really interesting from the Wharton School of Business where they were trying to measure love. They're trying to measure what they called companionate love at work. So what really made a workplace warm and inviting so that you could really be yourself? Um, and you think about it across the country, what 160 million people work, and so maybe 70% of those folks are working with one arm tied behind their back because they feel like they can't be themselves, they can't give their opinion. There's this whole positional authority thing that happens. It just sort of sucks, basically. For most people at work, their lives where they spend most of their time aren't that fulfilling. Um, and you think like, well, why is that? Like that just seems ridiculous. So I thought it'd be fun to try to do something different.
Yeah, well, that's staggering. I mean, that's pretty terrible numbers,
They are
30%.
awful. Yeah, really.
So what are some of the things that you felt would help that?
Yeah, well, uh, I think primarily at of those, the root cause of why people feel disengaged is because um, they don't feel emotionally safe at work. So there's a pretty interesting thing about what the way workplaces are organized is really about command and control. And do you like to be controlled?
Definitely not.
Yeah. So why do most places organize themselves to try to control you when people don't even like it? Um, so uh, I think partially why it is it's hard for people to learn to be vulnerable with each other and to
Mm,
feel like they can um, come in and grow and change. And that's an accepted thing to do. Like you can kind of let other people know your fallacies, your foibles. So you spend a lot of time at work trying to not let people know where you need help instead of the opposite, right? And then we know across, historically, we know, the people that are amazing in this society are people who have failed at things. And I love that the one about Michael Jordan, like getting kicked off his high school basketball team. I love the one about Walt Disney, who like got booted out of being a newspaper reporter because he wasn't creative, right? Like, So those are all workplaces that are toxic, right? So they couldn't figure out that we have a Michael Jordan. They couldn't figure out that we have a Walt Disney on our staff. So take the place where you work. Can they really figure out we've got an Elias on our staff? He's an amazing person. Why don't we try to get out of his way? Like, why don't we try to let him flourish? Instead of saying, like, yeah, Elias, you got to fit into this box. And if you don't fit into here, we're going to talk to you about it. So anyway, I think, at some level in an organization, a little bit of that stuff happens at an executive team level, maybe a manager level. It doesn't happen very much for folks on the front line. And we're all just humans. So anyway, that's all. I'm kind of running on and on.
No, that's amazing. It's very much a foreign concept, if you had to ask me, as far as getting out of someone's way instead of really putting more boundaries and barriers. When you think they're off, you might kind of narrow the scope instead of broaden it. If someone's not doing well, you might say, well, okay, let me just tell you exactly where you need to be. So I think the opposite happens in most workplaces.
So let me give you a parallel universe, that maybe gets it a little more accessible. Is most people go through school thinking school sucks. They can't wait to get out. How many people say, I wish I had more high school years? Like nobody does. And yet this lady, Marie Montessori, came along and she said, I bet I could create a school that people would actually really love. And I bet I could create a school where people could really excel and it wouldn't be like this horrible thing. So I'm wondering, can we create a workspace that's similar to a Montessori school? Instead of like this public school thing where it's just horrible for most people. Not everybody, but for most people, it's not a great experience and they learn in spite of themselves. I think most people at work get work done in spite of the organization, not because of it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Wow, that is a great parallel. And you brought up Maria Montessori. That's something that Monarch Pathways has been putting a little bit of effort in, kind of exploring Montessori principles and applying those to the workplace. What are some of those things that you felt are pretty incredible principles that can be placed pretty easily in a workplace?
Yeah. So can I just correct one thing you said?
Sure.
We're not putting a little bit of effort. I'm obsessed with it.
I take it back. You're absolutely right. That is, I would say obsessed is actually a really good word for it. You really are incorporating it in everything.
So one of the things, so here's some of the things that I think are applicable is Marie Montessori thought like, yeah, the teacher doesn't need to bring a lot to the table. Like you don't have this knowledge that you have to give to somebody else. In fact, she really thought if I'm doing something for you, I'm taking it away from you. So one of the things that I'm pretty fascinated about is she created a space where people learn from each other. If you think of most companies, they sort of set up these leaders and positional authorities and saying, hey, you have this knowledge, you need to bring these other people along. Well, for the most part, that doesn't work very well.
I see.
So I think part of what I'm fascinated about is maybe work is more about learning than it is about work. And work's a byproduct. But really what companies are doing is they're helping people learn and grow.
Awesome. Wow. That was a perfect answer. I really like that a lot. That makes a lot of sense. And what are some of the other nuggets in Montessori that have really stuck out to you? I think the more I've had the opportunity to learn about it, the more I've experienced it, I would never have thought that Montessori was applicable in more ways than, maybe a preschool setting. I think that's what my mind initially went to when I heard the word Montessori. As I start to learn about it, explore it, experience it, it's pretty incredible. So I think we've all kind of gotten some of those nuggets. You just mentioned one. Is there any others that you feel are just pretty earth shaking, I would say, in the workplace?
Well, I think, in my mind, if you really delve into it, each one of kind of the principles seems simple, but they're very complex. So I'll give you an example. I would think by nature and maybe just by style, I'm pretty participatory. as opposed to a command and control person. I've been shocked at how much of command person I am when it comes to
Hmm.
Montessori stuff. Like I've been shocked about how much I would have thought I'm inviting someone to participate, but really I'm not giving them any choices. Uh, so if you really push that out, it's amazing what it makes you do, right? And so I was surprised how much I was taken away from people as opposed to allowing them to be themselves. So I would say that's maybe one of the big sort of things. Like, yeah, well, I could go on and on about that, but that would be one answer to your question.
Yeah, and obsessed is definitely a word. I'm sure you could go on and on after opening that door. But let's see if I can get something. Can you tell me maybe one of those success stories that really sticks out with any of your time at Monarch Pathways? Any of those real feel good success stories that you've experienced?
Yeah, well, you know, where you're working at Roundtree would probably, I think they've had an amazing transformation. Like from when I first started in there to where they are today, is sort of shocking, really, when it comes right down to it. And it wasn't about buildings, it wasn't about infrastructure, it wasn't about money. It was more about how people behaved and how they treated each other. Um, so I think one of the success stories is, and I'd like to redo this at Roundtree and see how it is, but in the end, Roundtree got up to being only 8% of countries across 8% of companies across the world scored higher than them in engagement. So they got up. Roundtree scored higher in employee engagement than the Gallup organization did. And
How
so,
ironic is that?
and so when I first started in Roundtree, do you know, like usually companies have when the Department of Health is on campus, there's this like phone tree that goes around and everybody says like, oh, like make sure everything's in order. You know what I mean?
Yes, yeah, definitely.
When I first started there, that's what happened every time the CEO walked on campus. There was a phone tree, and everyone would go and give people warning that this guy was on campus.
No kidding.
No, and people like literally, um, I would say, lived in fear, and they spent a lot of time like trying to not make any kind of error at all. And the consequence of that was like it was basically it was a pretty wretched place. So they've made Roundtree's made a big culture change, and they've really kind of doubled down on it. And I think they've been a good example for other folks. So yeah, that's so I would say that's one. It's hard to imagine a place turning around like that. A better example.
Well, thank you, Gary. I think you'd probably have a million success stories if I could go on and on. But that was a great one. I'm a little biased. I can tell you that I came there after the culture implementation, so I had already experienced just visiting the campus that culture you're talking about, where it was warm and welcome. And even though I was somebody visiting the campus, I felt like I was a part of it in some way. And I'd say that that's remained. The culture is pretty wonderful there. So the last two things I'll ask you. I know we did some disc and personality lingo tests. So if could you recall a little bit of what your disc results were?
Yeah. So my disc result is I'm a high I. So if you think of a shortcut to disc, I tend to have a fast pace and I'm people oriented. My personality lingo is a connector. So I'm going to lean toward connecting people together as opposed to more task oriented and more sort of definitive decisions. So I would be a person that's less interested in let's just make a decision and more interested in does everybody get their say.
Gotcha.
I don't think the decision matters, to be honest with you. Like, what's the big deal about a decision? I think it more matters the journey. Who cares where you get to in the end?
What a beautiful way to end our journey today. Thank you so much, Gary. I really appreciate the time that we spent together and getting to know you a little bit more. you have so many interesting stories. We could probably go on and on, but I do appreciate your time this morning.
So one question for you.
Okay.
Do I get to interview you?
That is a deep question for another episode. We'll have to wait. Just kidding. Have a wonderful day, Gary. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. Good job.
All right. So